So we're going to cover the origins of vodka. It's difficult to pinpoint their actual origin, but two theories, depending which source you believe. It could be from 8th century of Poland or 9th century of Russia. One of the theories, um, vodka means water of life in Russian. If you reduce it to vada, means water. Um, it is believed that in the 14th century, the diminutive form of the word vodka interpreted as little water. And the alternate theory refers to the Polish word wodka, which earliest known mention of which can be found dating to 1405 in Attica Gorski court documents of the Palatinate of Sandomierz, Poland, is used in as a medicinal drink. Whichever version it is well documented by 1500s. Vodka became a beverage, also a chemist distillate from medicines and perfumes throughout the regions of Eastern Europe and Russia. Earliest vodka were distilled from the most plentiful, least expensive locally sourced grape. It's often harsh and unpleasant flavored. That's why it's common practice is to mask these flavors with herbs and spices. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, settlers in and around Poland began to utilize a newly introduced food source from the New World, the potato, as a base material. So it wasn't always potato. Despite the higher cost of potatoes, it's appreciated because it's much smoother, more palatable, and became a higher quality vodka. In 1870, the element carbon is discovered in the form of charcoal, which able to filter unwanted aromas and flavors. And this set the standard for the colorless and flavored vodka that is available today. Unlike any other spirits, vodka wasn't brought to the US until early 20th century. Its earliest introduction was a direct result of the rise of the communism in Russia. Basically, Russia started to nationalize their vodka industry in the late 1890s, and Vladimir Smirnov was forced to sell off his successful factory as a Smirnov vodka brand. Later, during October Revolution of 1917, Smirnov family was forced to flee the country, landed in Constantinople, now Istanbul of Turkey, established a vodka production facility there. The family later moved to now called Lviv, Ukraine, and started to sell the vodka under the name Smirnov, which is a French name. The family eventually built another distillery in Paris, but none of these are as successful as the one in Russia. In 1930, Vladimir Smirnov sold the rights to produce vodka under Smirnov name with Smirnov formula to Rudolf Kunet. So this guy is very important, Rudolf Kunet. Mr. Kunet was a former Russian who, after fleeing the country in the 1920s, had become a successful businessman in New York. The Kunets and the Smirnov had done business together before. Prior to the Russian Revolution, the Kunets supplied grain to the Smirnovs. Smirnoff vodka began to produce in the United States in 1933 and now established as the first and only American-made vodka for many years. Now, over 80 years later, the brand has retained both its name and distinctive of being one of the largest selling spirit brands in both the U.S. and the world. Vodka did not become widely consumed in America until the late 1940s, after World War II. Up until this time, vodka was considered an exotic specialty, also almost exclusively consumed by Eastern European immigrants. I preferred them vodka straight, ice cold, and one gulp from a small glass. With the rise of American cocktail culture in 1950s, um, the screwdriver, Blood Mary, and Moscow Mule all become part of the American cocktail scene. They also further developed popularity as a midday pick-me-up or pre-martini lunch. It left little telltale evidence on one's breath. The Smirnoff Company even to this benefit in their advertisement stating Smirnoff leaves you breathless. With many uses, a variety of mixtures, it's a ready substitute for gin in the martini, as a product to be consumed straight or on the rocks. It became the most widely consumed type of spirits in the U.S. It also benefited from 1960 to 1970s counterculture movement uh, during the ease of the Cold War tensions between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. These allow importation of Stolichnaya vodka from Russia in return for the establishment of a Pepsi production facility in the USSR. As a result, vodka came to be perceived as cool and cutting edge. Today, there's a lot of brands, including um, in Europe, Eastern Europe, North America. Vodka consumers has an estimated number of more than 1,500 products to choose from. Okay, let's talk about the EU vodka wars here. Basically, it could boil down to um, the EU vodka belt plus Poland versus France plus the UK. The vodka belt includes Poland, Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia. Baltic states of Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania. Nordic states like Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Iceland. These are traditionally made from grain and potatoes, whereas um, during 2003, a French vodka known as Ciroc used grapes as a base material. This triggered a lot of EU member countries that started the EU vodka war. As a result, on February 2006, Poland, with EU vodka belt, requested the European Commission revise the definition of vodka, include just spirits produced from grains, potatoes, or sugar beets. And then the other side, France plus the UK, argued that it was entitled to the same, argued that these restrictions um, is an attempt to monopolize the vodka market by the vodka belt countries, whereas the EU vodka belt was saying that they're entitled to the same protection as to basic ingredients and manufacturing processes as those granted to whiskeys and brandies. After significant deliberation, Horst Schielenhardt, member of the EU Parliament, this guy is probably important, Horst Schielenhardt, MEP, member of the EU Parliament from Germany, suggested a compromise. The EU definition of vodka could be written so as to include those products distributed from cereals, potatoes, and or those produced from other agricultural raw materials. These vodka produced from other agricultural raw materials such as grapes, carrots, or onions must state the base material on the label. That's why Ciroc will say grape vodka. This proposal, known as the Schielenhardt Compromise, passed in 2007 and forms the basis for the EU vodka definition today. This decision led to many traditional vodka producing countries of the EU to form organizations at the national level in order to pursue regulations and protection. So the most visible is Poland, which has been awarded a GI, geographic indication, for its vodka. So for the Poland GI, vodka must made exclusively in Poland with Polish growing grains or potatoes. So they have a trademark Polska vodka or Polish vodka symbol. Other countries such as Estonia, Sweden, Finland, Lithuania, Norway have their own GIs as well. All right, let's talk about the history of gin. Basically, it started off with Dutch physician Franciscus Sylvius. Uh, he or she was born in 1614 to 1672, and is often credited with the invention of gin, which in mid-17th century, however, juniper-infused spirits were produced long before Dr. Sylvius was even born. The earliest juniper-infused spirits, Genever, appeared in the 13th century encyclopedia uh, called Der Naturen Blom, written in Brooks. In addition, it has been claimed that British soldiers fighting in the 80 Years' War against the Spanish were drinking Genever, widely referred to as Dutch courage, for its calming effect. As early as 1585, the term Geneva was based on the Dutch word for juniper and over the years became shortened to gin. Nevertheless, the good Dr. Sylvius, professor of medicine at Holland's University of Leiden, can at the very least be acknowledged for popularizing a medicinal tonic made with neutral spirits and the oil of the juniper berry. The juniper berry was believed to cure all sorts of ailments afflicting the bladder, kidney, and circulatory system. Soon gin tonic became a popular cure. A few years later, during the 1689 to 1702 reign of King William III of England, duties and taxes on French imported wines and brandies were raised, while excess tax English distilled spirits was lowered. This means that the incentive led English distillers to make their own versions of gin, and based on the successful production methods invented by the Dutch. The English mass-produced their gin using inexpensive corn spirits blended with juniper berries. And the flavorings masked the crude spirit's harsh taste, at the same time produced a very inexpensive beverage. Not long after the English monarchy began to allow unlicensed production of gin for the masses, the gin craze commenced. The gin craze was a period between 1720 to 1751, when the per capita consumption of distilled spirits almost tripled. Centered in London, this urban phenomenon created a web of thousands of dram shops, where gin was sold to patrons to get around the bar. And this gin was accessible and expensive, and it became a popular culture for the working class poor. It was blamed for a myriad of social problems. In response to the public disorder brought on by the gin craze, the general drunkenness part of the population, the British government eventually passed several gin acts. These new laws required a license in order to legally sell gin and also institute taxation of the product. As a result, easy access to gin slowed. The gin joints were eventually licensed and expanded their range to include beer and wine, becoming the precursors to the modern-day pub or bar. At this time, some producers began to produce higher quality gins designed for drinking pleasure rather than just alcohol consumption. Soon, with the invention of the continuous coffee still in the mid-19th century, the grain spirits used as the base distillate for gin greatly improved. Low congener, high-proof neutral spirits shifted the flavor profile to actually appreciate the flavoring themselves rather than significantly, and then they significantly reduced the need for sweetening to mask unpleasant flavors. In this way, the London dry style of gin came into vogue. England's empire helped spread the taste for gin to all continents, especially the warm climate colonies. Bitter quinine, one of the botanics used to control malaria, blended perfectly with gin to create the crisp, clean, and cold flavor of gin and tonic. And gin was also used in the original martini recipe, was the star of pre-Prohibition Americans' cocktail culture. Prohibition did little to curb Americans' demand for gin. English gin was smuggled into the U.S. from Canada, and called bathtub gin was produced by top full of blending botanical oils with neutral spirits. Developed wild over a century ago, a style of London dry gin has been copied worldwide today, and by far the world's favorite style of gin. And also the old historical juniper berry infused spirits like Genever, Steinhager, and Old Tom has become popular. Alright, this is the history of whiskey. Generally believed that the Irish Celts, were the first to produce a spirit from grains. It is believed that these early spirits were quite similar to whiskey presently made in Ireland. However, the written evidence of spirit produced from grains appeared in the last decade of the 15th century in Scotland, as a transfer of malt to be made into aqua vitae, by order of the king, is recorded in the Exchequer Rolls of Scotland. The present-day name whiskey is attributable to either the Scottish Celtic word Isca Baha or the Irish Celtic term Uisce Ball, both which means water of life, or lively water. It is interesting to note that in early times, when alchemists were searching for extended and healthy life, spirits were commonly called water of life, aquavite ishkebaha. When the product was brought to England, the English found the Celtic word too difficult to pronounce, so it was anglicized to whiskey. So this is the history of American whiskey. All right. Um, it dates back to the 1700s, late 1700s, when the founding of the original American colonies. During this period, Scottish, Irish, and German immigrants crossed the Atlantic to escape economic hardship and religious persecution, and lived the American dream. Um, and it has found that rye grain grew really well in Pennsylvania soil, while maize, a variety of corn, grew well in Virginia. These grapes became widely cultivated, but as they were both perishable and expensive to transport, distilling them into whiskey became a profitable way to utilize the crops. Almost every farmer made whiskey here. During the Revolutionary War in 1775 to 1783, it helped to found a new nation, but it also left a huge debt. This in turn led to the Whiskey Excise Tax of 1791, stipulating that farmers who produced whiskey had to pay a new tax. This angered the farmers, most of whom were Revolutionary War veterans themselves. They refused to pay the tax. Eventually, the people organized an uprising known as the Whiskey Rebellion. But this was quickly suppressed by the militia. But the incident proved that the new government had the ability to enforce laws. The whiskey tax remained difficult to collect. It was eventually repealed during Thomas Jefferson's presidency. Eager to avoid the tax, many farmers chose to move their whiskey making into the wilderness, where it remained outside the federal jurisdiction. Their corn grew plentifully, and the limestone filter waters were ideal for producing, which would ultimately become bourbon whiskey. This area eventually became the states of all we know, Kentucky, Indiana, and Tennessee. So, rye and maize corn was first introduced, and then now they're pressed into the wilderness, where there's plentiful corn also, but limestone filter waters. By the 1800s, a high percentage of whiskey made in the U.S. was unaged and often unpalatable. Okay, and there's also, you can add all kinds of ingredients to improve the taste, and there were no trademarks or protection laws at that moment. However, the quality and reputation of some soon began to improve. In 1870, George Garvin Brown, a pharmaceutical salesman, which, believe it or not, whiskey was sold in pharmacy in those days, created a glass bottle, sealed, labeled, and signed bourbon with a quality guarantee. This product was named after Dr. William Forrester, who was a surgeon, army surgeon. This product became known as the Old Forester. The Old Forester was the first bourbon whiskey to be sold exclusively in sealed glass bottles, and soon became the standard practice. A few years later, E.H. Taylor, the mayor of Frankfort, Kentucky, created the Bottle in Bond Act of 1897. The law was passed to ensure authenticity of bourbon whiskey, which means that you can't add, mandated that to be considered bottle bonded and labeled as such, the maturing whiskey had to be kept in locked warehouses for 4 years, be the product of one distillery from one distilling season, and be bottled at 100 proof. This law provided the government with its tax revenues, accounting for over half of all, and ensures the authenticity of the whiskey. Under right now the TDB calculations, bottled and bound spirits must be unaltered from the original condition, meaning coloring, flavorings, or sweeteners are not allowed, but they are allowed to be cut with water, filtered, or chilled filtered, and that's it. And it only applies in the U.S. Alright, so let's talk about the history of brandy here. The distillation is believed was first applied to wine. So during the 16th century, building upon the existing brisk trade in wine between the port of La Rochelle on the Charente River in France and Holland. So basically shipping wine from France to Holland from the port of La Rochelle. All of this trade was conducted by sea, as casks of wine obviously take up a lot of space on small sailing vessels. It was eventually discovered that wine could be concentrated by eliminating the water content and transporting the spirit or the quote soul of the wine to Holland. It basically is sitting in the barrels. The wine um, evaporates and then concentrates the wine. Upon its arrival, water would be added, thereby reconstituting the wine. Concentrating the wine had the added benefit of reducing the tax burden on the shipments, as taxes were based on volume. So they get less taxed because there's less volume. As the first shipment of concentrated wine arrived in Holland, it was discovered that the concentrate had a unique, pleasing flavor of its own. It became apparent that after shipped in wooden casks, the product was better than original wine. The Dutch called the new product brandewijn, which means burnt wine, which is where the word brandy comes from, and eventually was anglicized as brandy. The Germans still use the term. They call it the Weinbrand, which is burnt wine, right? But throughout the European Union, acceptable to use the word brandy. Let's do a take on the history of rum here. It's intimately connected to the sources of sugarcane. So, first part, we're going to talk about the source of sugarcane. It is believed that it is originated in New Guinea, which is in the southern hemisphere, right above Australia. And from there, it was taken to China and India. The plant continued to be transported westward through Asia and then to the eastern shores of the Mediterranean Sea, so westwards. Finally, it was introduced into Europe by the Arabs after the 7th century CE, where it was grown in the warm climates of Spain, Portugal, and northern Africa. Christopher Columbus brought sugarcane cuttings from the Canary Islands off coast of Africa. So that's Canary Islands is north, off coast of northern Africa. To the New World, he brought it to the New World during 1493 arrival in the West Indies. Sugarcane flourished in the climate of the Caribbean. Soon, sugar was shipped to Europe to supplement the sugar process there from sugar beet. So they've only been using sugar beets, but obviously they grow it. It's growing really well in the Caribbean, and became a factory of sugar, and then they sent it to Europe. European settlers in the West Indies soon found out the molasses residue from sugar production was easily fermented, so they began to distill the ferment, which led to the spirit now we know as rum. It is believed that New World rum was first produced on the British island of Barbados and the French island of Martinique, although fermented varieties of sugarcane juice had known been in ancient India and China. From Barbados and Martinique, rum's production spread to Haiti, Jamaica, and Cuba. It was in Cuba in the mid-1800s that the family Don Facundo Barcari began to produce rum on a large scale in a truly industrialized fashion. The Bacardi family isolated a proprietary strain of yeast that enabled them to produce a light, clean style rum that is still one of the world's top sellers. There are a number of theories about the derivation of the word rum. So it could come from the Latin word for sugar, saccharum, so the rum at this end of the word saccharum. Other theories be the word rumbulian, which means the great tempest. Whatever the original source, throughout history there are many words with the term rum in them, and most of these detonated an inclination toward the powerful effect of consumption of rum. The development of the rum industry grew as more and more sugarcane plantations sprang up in the West Indies. Sugarcane harvested by hand with a machete was extremely labor intensive, requiring many workers. The need for cheap labor was met by importing slaves from Africa. Slave labor allowed the plantations to thrive and spread throughout the West Indies and Southern America by the 17th century. A tragic byproduct of the rum trade was the introduction of the import-export market known as the triangle trade. So literally a triangle. A ship would start filled with slaves would sail from Africa, going to the West Indies. There, the slaves would be exchanged for molasses. So slaves would be dropped off, do the plantations and shit, and then they get the molasses, which would fill the ship. The ship would then sail northward to New England, which is America, right? New England, where the molasses would be traded for rum made in distilleries over there in New England. Finally, a ship would carry its cargo of rum to Western Africa, where it'll once again take on slaves. But it'll take the ship to Europe, obviously unload the rum, sell the rum, and then go back to Western Africa again. Each step along the triangular path resulted in profits for the ship's owner. The route was continuously retraced until it was finally abandoned in the early 1800s under the pressure of England's Royal Navy embargo of the transoceanic slave trade. Rum production was also part of the early history of the U.S. Dozens of distilleries were established in the colonies. By 1775, 12 million gallons of rum was made and with imported Caribbean molasses and were being consumed by the American colonists about 4 gallons per person annually. In light of this fact, there are those who claim that the American Revolution was not about tea and taxation, but was in fact about rum and taxation. Since the British law of 1763 was designed to force the colonists to abandon the purchase of West Indies rum and buy only the more expensive British rums. Accordingly, rum may have been the actual spark that started the Revolutionary War. The American love of rum continued through the Revolutionary War and to the next century, waning only after the dissolution of the Triangle trade, when the popularity of rum declined as that of whiskey rose. The first legal definition of rum was created in 1909 when the British Royal Commission on Whiskey declared that, quote, rum is a spirit distilled directly from sugarcane products in sugar-growing countries, unquote. Today, rum is produced in over 100 countries worldwide and consumed in virtually every nation in the world. Alright, right now we're going to touch on the history of tequila here. The agave plant was used for many practical purposes, but for the native Mexicans discovered that it could be fermented into a palatable beverage. For example, agave, about a dozen or so were recognized by the native inhabitants for use as food and medicine. The agave fiber was used as a rope and binding cords. The leaves were very broad and durable. It's perfect for roof thatching, and its thin, sharp thorns provided needles. Historians believe that around 200 CE it was discovered that the juice of the agave plant could be fermented into an intoxicating beverage. The Aztec civilization gave names to the products they create with agave. The fermented juice became known as Octilipoliqui. It's named after Ometoquili and the Aztec god of drinking. Octilipoliqui, the fermented juice, was also used as a narcotic during the human sacrifice rites of the era. The art of alcoholic distillation in Mexico can be traced back to the early 1500s. However, it is believed that early attempts at the making of distilled beverage using pulque produced a spirit known as mezcal wine. This process was primitive, but the essential steps are still used right now. First, the agave was cooked, then was pounded, crushed with mallets to squeeze the sweet juice from the agave fibers. This juice was fermented into the low alcohol pulque. Finally, the fermented juice was distilled in clay pots. The resulting spirit was usually consumed unaged. Mezcal wine was produced all over central Mexico from the many varieties of agave native to the region, although production around the town of Tequila in the state of Jalisco was limited in the 16th and 17th centuries. Distillation became the main enterprise of the area by the 18th century. Near the end of the 18th century, from 1785 to 1789, under the Spanish ruler King Charles III, the production of mezcal wine was temporarily forbidden in hopes that the locals would then need to import Spanish wine and spirits, which would increase much tax revenues for Spain. Much to the Spaniards' dismay, this attempt failed. In 1792, the new king, Ferdinand IV, allowed the legal resumption of fermentation and spirit distillation in Mexico, and the first license to ever produce mezcal wine in the Tequila region was granted to Jose Maria Guadalupe Cuervo, so Jose Cuervo, as we know, in 1795. Many small distilleries proliferated during the 19th century by making and selling mezcal wine. They were set up as taverns and served the local populace in the surrounding neighborhoods. At this time, mezcal wine was being distilled from the fermented juice of many different agave species. Eventually, producers narrowed down the agave source that produced the best tasting mezcal wine to the blue agave. So mezcal came before the tequila that we know, and then the agave plant, the blue agave, was classified by a botanist named Frederick Albert Constantin Weber in 1902, and the blue agave was given the botanic name Agave tequiliana Weber Azul. After they found the blue agave in 1873, blue agave based mezcal wine was renamed to tequila in order to distinguish mezcal and tequila. By the first decade of the 20th century, there were almost 90 tequila distilleries operating in Jalisco. Organizations designed to advance the tequila industry began to form. In 1949, the first official Norma Oficial Mexicana for tequila was established. Basically, it's a regulation that protects their agricultural products, just like other countries. NOM for short, protects the appellation of origin, regulates production, establishes standards and quality and authenticity. And each company that makes tequila are approved and assigned a 4-digit NOM number that appears in the label. Alright, this is my take on the history of liqueurs. Alright, bombs, crams, elixirs, oils. All these terms have been used throughout history to refer to liqueurs. Originally, liqueurs were created for use as medicinal remedies, love potions, and general cure-alls. In the early Middle Ages, the monks and healers, with their limited chemical knowledge, used spirits and botanicals familiar to them to create medicines they deemed beneficial for various maladies. During the 15th century, the physician and philosopher Paracelsus suggested that the goals of those working in the field of medicine should focus less on bloodletting and purging and more on the preparation of imbibable cures and tonics. By then, the therapeutic value of certain seeds, herbs, and roots was well known. Through trial and error, those plant parts that had little or no value as medicine were set aside, while others were retained and are still in use today. A modern pharmacopoeia still lists caraway seed, angelica root, oils of orange and lemon, and various herbs as being beneficial to a person's digestion or general constitution. In this manner, up to the end of 18th century, liqueurs were primarily flavored with plants, herbs, and spices that were chosen not for their flavor, but for their ability to aid a person's health. But by the beginning of the 19th century, when chemistry became the dominant science and preoccupation with better things in life was in full swing, the evolution of liqueurs, appreciated for their flavor and sophistication, expanded and became a thriving business in many parts of Europe, especially France and Italy, became the primary producers of liqueurs during the 1800s and remain so. Currently, other countries were becoming famous for their liqueurs. Holland became known for orange flavored liqueurs. Germany gained fame for its herbal products, notably caraway seed preparations. Denmark and Spain found fruit and spice combinations to be very profitable. Scotland and Ireland produced liqueurs using their whiskey as a base for fruit and herbal concoctions. The 20th century brought a large and diverse assortment of liqueurs to the worldwide market. This trend continues today. What started with the production of brandy-based herbal medicines during the Middle Ages have evolved into broad spirits-based industry. Producers use any type of spirit like whiskey, rum, tequila, vodka, neutral spirits, and gin, as well as tried and true brandy as base spirit. Increasingly complex flavors, new sweeteners, and additives such as dairy products have expanded and will continue to expand the range and versatility of the liqueur category.